Do you have something that you truly, relentlessly desire? Despite your state of life, is there something else you would go completely to the end of the world to get? Well, lucky for you, there's a way to achieve what you're looking for, and you won't need to go to the end of the world to get it. But you will need to go somewhere, and the place may be too out of reach for some. It's not far away, closer than one may believe, but there are requirements that some individuals may not meet. First, whatever it is that you seek, know that you must seriously desire what you want. In your eyes, it should be something you need. If you begin the journey without the correct state of mind, you will surely fail. And it will be near impossible to turn back once the journey starts. The second requirement is that you will need a vehicle of sorts. Most use a car, as it's the most comfortable choice. There have been a select few that have used small, motorized vehicles, such as an ATV or motorcycle, but this has proven to be quite difficult, as the conditions of the journey can prove to be too bothersome. Do not use a vehicle too large or noticeable, as you will need some of the cover of night to be most safe. Also, while any sort of car will do, you may not want to choose the most expensive or cherished vehicle. You can take your slick new black Mercedes for the drive if you'd like, but don't expect it to come out in the pristine state. Make sure your vehicle is completely fueled before beginning the drive. The first task to accomplish is to locate the road. It doesn't have a name, it's not on the map, and technically it doesn't even exist. It will only show up if you're looking for it at the right time, and you will only spot it if you know what to look for. Finally, you must be alone during the journey. You didn't think you'd be able to go with a group, did you? It must be night when you begin. Choose the time of the night where you believe the roads are least populated. Drive to any area that is just a stretch of road surrounded by woods. Here's where you want to start paying close attention. If you're looking for the road, it will turn up eventually, but you need to search for the road's hint in order to pull down the right one. Once you're close, you will see or feel its signs, but what the signs will be will depend on what it is you desire. For example, if you're in search of wealth, you may spot shimmers on the empty branches of trees as if they resemble the shine of gold or diamonds. If you seek love, you may begin to see rose petals slowly dance in the light breeze, blowing in the road's direction. If you seek revenge, you might sense an ever-growing feeling of heat or anger in your body as you approach. Just know what it is you really want, and you'll have no problem finding the turn. Once you're sure you've found the revealed road, take a deep breath and turn down onto it. At this point, you have officially started down the nameless road which brings you through 11 miles, leading to whatever it is you seek. Each mile will test your desire and will expose if you really do want what you're searching for. Before you go any further, stop the car and be wary of a few advertisements. Do not turn on a radio during the drive. Do not use a phone during the drive. Reception will be cut off anyway. Do not open the windows during the drive. Make sure they are closed before you continue. If you are riding a vehicle without windows or a top, then prepare for the worst, as the odds are heavily against you. Do not attempt to leave your vehicle at any time. You'll never want to exceed 30 miles per hour, unless you're desperate to make it through a section of the road. And most importantly, as with any drive, buckle up. Feel free to prepare and make sure you're ready. Once the road has been entered, time has stopped, so you don't need to worry about losing the night. Though you may not notice, you're not actually in your own world anymore. Take one last moment to realize that once the first mile is over, there is no turning back. If you ponder turning back at all, know that you shouldn't even be on the journey in the first place. Once all is done, continue on the road. On the first mile, you won't see much change. The road passes through mostly woods, with a few miles being an exception. The air will turn a bit colder, in which you should turn on your heating system if the vehicle has one. You won't want to take your eyes off the road later. Take some time to calm any uneasiness by admiring some of the night sky. You'll see it completely lined with stars, more than what you would ever believe possible. If the weather was cloudy beforehand, you will also notice that the sky is now clear. On the second mile, the air will become even colder. This is primarily the reason why travelling in an open vehicle is very difficult. With each mile, the air will drop in temperature, even if the season should be warm. If the air is too cold to bear, even with the heat on, your only option is to speed up. With each mile, the road also becomes more complex, taking more turns and showing an increasing amount of road hazards. Be sure to always keep focused on the road in front of you in order to avoid as many bumps or obstacles as possible. Hitting a few rocks and potholes won't hamper your progress too much, but you'll want to keep it in the best condition for as long as possible. If your vehicle is forced to stop because of damage, then there's nothing left you can do but eventually freeze to death. On the third mile, you may begin to spot silhouettes of human figures in the lining of trees. Pay no attention to them, even if they seem to get closer. It'll be hard to resist peeking at their unnerving, distant appearance, but know that they will reveal themselves later. At this mile, the road will become dirt if you weren't driving on it in the beginning. Keep to the center of the path, as it will become narrow and wide at random intervals. On a quick side note, should you ever attempt to turn around, despite the previous warnings, you'll be left on a path which never ends. You would simply run out of fuel eventually, and be left to freeze in the cold conditions. On the fourth mile, you will not only see more of the figures, but you will begin to, in a sense, hear them. In the back of your mind, a very faint, unintelligible whisper will echo. These will come and go, but you can't stop them. If they become bothersome or distracting, try and tune them out by thinking of what it is you desire. Attempting to listen and determine what the voices are saying will only attract them to you, and you want to be as far away from them as you can. They'll be closer later, but there's no use bringing them near you this early. On the fifth mile, you will come to a clearing. The lining of trees to your left will disappear to reveal a lake, with no end, with a beaming, great moon over the water. The illumination from the moon will be so spectacular that the vehicle's headlights will no longer be required. Restrain yourself from gazing at it. If you look at this light for even more than a few seconds, the road in front of you will end, throwing your vehicle into the water, in which you will freeze in mere minutes. The voices will be gone for this mile, but don't rejoice yet. They'll be back. On the sixth mile, take into account that you are more than halfway done. Despite the progress, you may lose hope here. The stars will have disappeared at this point, leaving the sky an empty, black abyss. The clearing will have ended, leading you back into the woods. The only light you will have will be provided by your vehicle's headlights, but they will flicker from time to time, even if you're sure they're in perfect working order. If you have a radio in the vehicle, it will turn on here automatically. If you didn't turn it off beforehand, it'll produce an overwhelming screech that will send you off the path. A calm voice will then begin to speak about your greatest fears, what it is you are horrified of in your life. It will speak in a way that will cause you to visualize the words in your mind. So, don't listen to it. If you begin to comprehend what it's saying, the horrors will prove too much for you to stay on the road safely. Attempting to turn off the radio will prove no use. Speed up if you need to. Just keep your mind off the voice as much as you can. As you approach the end of the mile, the voice will fade out of the speakers, leaving your ears at peace. For now. On the 7th mile, the voices from the figures will return. It won't sound like a whisper this time, but more like distant screams, growing closer with each sound. At some point on this mile, you will hear one of them in your ear, as if one of them were right behind you. This is because one of the figures have found their way into your vehicle. Do not turn around. Their faces will shock you to a paralysis, leading you off the road. If you don't draw attention to it, it will become uninterested and hopefully leave. These beings are said to be ones who have travelled down this road before, but were not successful. They live the remainder of their existence suffering in the darkness, with their only goal being to bring other travellers down with them. It has been said from experience that these beings can't physically harm you, so as long as they don't cause you to wreck, you should be fine. On the 8th mile, slow down if you're going too fast. The roads here take very sharp turns, which, if overshot, will throw the vehicle into a pit through the trees. The cold is near fatal here. If you were to have a glass or bottle of liquid in your vehicle, it should be solid in seconds. The heating system will have become completely obsolete. Your headlights will flicker more, sometimes shutting off for a few seconds. You should brake if this happens, but do not completely stop. The figures will be following you at this point, and should you stop for too long, they will surround and trap your vehicle. More of their screams can be heard from outside your doors, sometimes even sounding of maniacal laughter. Their hands will claw at your windows, desperate to reach in and feel something living. Do not look at them. They won't block your windshield, and the last thing you want to happen is to crash and be trapped with them. If you don't make it from here, pray that it's the freezing that ends you. On the 9th mile, your vehicle will stall. The headlights will shut off, as will all other systems inside. There's nothing you can do to prevent this. What you will need to do is close your eyes and immediately attempt to restart the vehicle. Keep your eyes closed, as the figures would have surely surrounded you at this point. The starting of the vehicle will frighten them, and they will all back away temporarily. This will give you a chance to start moving forward again. If you begin to hear the windows crack from their struggle, don't lose focus. The beings can alter the vehicle, but remember that they still do not have the strength to physically affect you. You will hear nothing but their voices rampage in your mind, as there could be anywhere between a dozen or 100 after you now. Once you start the vehicle, floor it. Floor it so long as you could stay in the path. When the mile is done, the beings will retreat. On the 10th mile, the voices of the beings will stop. If you were to look in your rearview mirror, do not actually do this, you will see them following you, but not as if they were chasing. They're watching you, as if they're seeing you off. As you go down the 10th mile, the road will be smoother, as if you were back on the 1st mile. The figures will be lining the sides of the path ahead of you. They won't be after you, but they will watch you as you pass. Some have theorized that the beings are impressed here, that you have come a long way on the journey to what you desire. This is false. They are not impressed, but they are happy you are about to approach the next mile. They are happy because you are most likely going to your death. On the 11th and final mile, everything in your vehicle will lose power, as it did on the 9th mile. The vehicle would normally be immobile, but you will still be moving. An unknown force will be pulling you forward. In the darkness, you will see a glowing red light up ahead, as if there were a light at the end of a tunnel. Close your eyes and cover them. Do whatever it takes to make sure you do not see what you're about to go through. Covering your ears would also be helpful, but keeping your eyes covered should be a higher priority. The red light is another clearing, but there is no moon or lake this time. Once it's entered, unrelenting and inconceivable noises will sound from all directions. No amount of bravery and conditioning will spare you from these sounds. The cold will turn into a merciless heat, burning all parts of the vehicle. You will feel the illusion of the flesh being burned off your bones, that every part of you is being destroyed as you travel through screams and audible suffering. As long as you keep your eyes closed and resist the urge to see where you are, you will survive through the suffering. This will last a total of 31 seconds, but many fail to keep their vision closed during that time and are left to the worst fate of the road. Where is this mile located? Those who have survived do not know. Some have named it the transmission from hell, but whether it's part of hell is debatable. After the final mile, power will return. Stop the vehicle. Take a moment to possibly regain some of your sanity. Let the screaming in your ears begin to fade, and know that you have nearly completed your journey with the hardest task overcome. Breathe, and begin to drive forward once again. After only a kilometer, your vehicle will have arrived at a dead end. Stop here, and don't attempt to move again. Nothing will happen right this second, but you will not be disappointed. Relax and close your eyes. Imagine in your mind what it is you've desired the entire time. It will most likely still be the same as when you entered. But with some, this desire may actually change through making this journey. Think about what it is that you went through such terrifying and difficult means to acquire, and imagine possessing it in your hands. Once you have completely visualized this, slowly open your eyes. You will then find yourself at the beginning of the unnamed road where you first began. This may confuse you, but know that you are finished. Your task is done. Your mind will then turn to your reward. If what you desired was material, check in the back seat, or in the trunk if the object is larger. If the object was small enough, it might already be in your pocket. If what you desired was non-material, then do not be disappointed if the change was not immediate. Turn back to where you came from, and you will find in your life that what you wanted is there. You may have found the love of your dreams. You may have gained unnatural, imaginable power. You may have put your most hated enemy to the most satisfying revenge possible. You will also have, no doubt, gained what you deserved. So now that the task is done, what's the catch? Is your vehicle cursed? Is there something you're about to lose? Is your death imminent? The answer to all is no, of course. You've done the challenge. You've proved worthy of what you desire. As stated before, the sounds of the 11th mile will continue to exist in your mind, potentially causing you some vivid and unusual nightmares, but these should prove as nothing compared to what you've gained. Now, one last question. Is there something else you desire? Are you not satisfied yet? After all, you're left right back where you started. The road's right in front of you. So, are you up for another drive? If so, buckle up and just move forward. Your subconscious didn't want to click this, but you did anyway. That's good. Well, maybe not good exactly, but it's a start. Let's just be honest with ourselves. You are dead. Not in that look behind you jump scare sense, in the You have been dead for some time since. Deep down you know it, or suspect it at least. But right this second, you are amused by this. Where's this going, you ask? So you're not quite ready yet. That's to be expected. Denial, a vital part of human experience. You've heard your life passes before your eyes when you die. It does, but not the way you think. Your past doesn't flash before you. Your future does. Not your real future, the future you imagine for yourself. The human mind doesn't handle severe change well. It needs to take time to process. Remember losing the first thing you really loved? How your perceptions changed? That was your mind trying to sort it out. That's what your life is now. It's your dying mind trying to sort things out. Again, deep down, you know you are dead. But it can't be spelled out here. It would be too emotionally traumatic. So, instead, here are a few examples of something that might have happened. That near miss when you avoided a horrible accident. That time you almost drowned but came up at the last minute. That horrible illness that you made a miraculous recovery from. Any of that sound a little familiar? At the moment of death, your mind isn't quite ready to accept the sudden, jarring end to everything. So, it invents your future. That's not possible. It makes no sense, you're thinking. That's okay. Time is subjective. Remember how dreams feel like days? Or how, when you're in pain, seconds feel like hours? This is just another manifestation of that. In reality, you died less than a second ago. Even as your brain tries to cope, it also tries to understand death. So, have you found yourself with more of a fascination with death? Horror? Maybe movies? Maybe books? Maybe short, scary stories? You've read a few tales. It's comfortable, because you are working towards the truth. This sight is simply your mind's manifestation of a coping mechanism. Everything here you've read and listened to is preparing you for the transition. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Well, for you it kind of is. Humor. Another coping mechanism. So, you're going to close this story with a snort or a shake of the head. This isn't the finale. This isn't the time you will accept the truth. It's the first seed. You know how, in dreams, you don't remember everything in reality? What's your mother's favourite food? What's the first thing you felt guilty about? Do you remember where you got every scar? Where is the first place you went on vacation? Anything fuzzy? Are you forgetting things you should know? You are shutting down. Think about it. Sleep well. The deep web is one of the most amazing things on Earth. Not because of how joyful it makes people or anything, but because it is a completely uncensored view of people. You can speak your mind, buy what you want, do anything you want. When on the deep web, you have complete and total freedom. I had always been fascinated by the deep web, and at the time of the events in this story occurred, I was in college. A lot of people in my campus had really been getting into accessing the deep web. It was almost like a trend. With so many people getting on it, it seemed perfectly safe for me to give it a try. Now, I had always heard of the deep web horror stories. Stories of hacking, stumbling on disgusting sites, and people even somehow finding your address. These stories were mainly what kept me off the deep web. But with most of the people at my college using it on a normal basis, I decided to give it a go. I asked a friend to come over and help me set it up. When my friend arrived, we opened up my laptop and began to set everything up. He told me that they were using a program that lets you access the deep web. He also asked me if I was planning on doing anything illegal, to which I replied no. He said that since I wasn't, we didn't need to install Tails, which is apparently a software that makes it more secure if you plan on doing illegal things. A little while later, everything was set up. I had my new IP address, and my friend gave me a brief rundown on what to do and what not to do. He made it very clear that when I was using the hidden wiki, that I kept it on censor mode, so that it would be less likely for me to see something I didn't want to see. After about 2 weeks of using the deep web, I felt like a pro. I had accessed many different sites, spoken with some of the great people, made friends, even bought some weed. I had become cocky and was ready to dig deeper into the dark web. I turned off the censored mode on the hidden wiki and began to browse the links. It took a while, mostly because Tor is a bit slow and many of the links just led to dead web pages. Eventually, I stumbled onto a site called All the Gore. It was mainly a big chat room with many different topics. I had a fairly strong stomach, and I had seen many violent movies and had seen beheadings, killings, etc. through the normal internet. After looking at a few different chat rooms, I noticed how sick this site really was. The people in these chat rooms were actual killers, bragging about some of the things they had done. In the chat room, you could also post pictures. One man by the name of Culture 045 had the stage in one of the chat rooms. He was explaining in detail how he had broken into someone's house, kidnapped a little girl, and brutally killed her parents by hiding under their bed, and then opening their throats. He then explained how he brought the little girl back to his house, abused her, beat her, and cut her up. I didn't think he was telling the truth at first, but then he posted pictures. These were the most horrifying pictures I'd ever seen. Close-ups of the poor 8 to 10-year-old girl being brutally attacked, beaten, and cut with a knife. Culture kept posting pictures, the new ones of the girl, tied to a chair, bleeding, crying, throwing up, etc. Then, he showed a picture of him with a drill, drilling into her skull. The most haunting part is that while he was doing it, he was looking at the camera with sheer joy on his face. I had seen enough and typed in the chat room window, "You people are sick and deserve to die. How can you sleep at night?" Immediately, people began making fun of me, saying that I was just as helpless and ignorant as the little girl in the pictures, and that I should get off the big boy part of the internet. They began saying I was a pussy and calling me an empath, when Culture typed something in the chat box. He said, "Really? Where do you live, buddy? I'm sure everyone would love to see you on this site." I then made the biggest mistake of my life and typed, "I'm calling the police and having this site shut down." Less than a minute later, everything on the site went black, and a new chat box appeared in green. In it, someone named Admin1 typed in the box. He said, "Call the cops and you will regret it." I didn't type anything in the box and reached for my cell phone. What happened next haunts me to this day. My phone said I had a new message. I opened it and it said, "Call the police and you're dead." There was no number. It didn't even say unknown number. It was just blank. I looked back at my laptop and saw my webcam light turn on. I quickly covered it, but I saw on the screen a picture of me looking at my phone. I got wide-eyed and froze for a moment when the admin typed again. "Put the phone down right now and uncover your webcam." I put my phone down, but kept the webcam covered. He then typed again. "Okay, be like that." Right after, he posted my full name, age, and address in the chat box and typed, "It would be a shame if you and your college buddies went missing, wouldn't it?" I then did as he said and uncovered my webcam. He told me to follow his instructions on how to make it impossible for me to reach the site again. I followed each and every one. When I finished, I got a text that said, "Now, don't ever try and come back." Just like before, it had no number. I still called the police from my friend's phone, but they were never able to find the site. If you ever go on the deep web, don't ever just mindlessly explore, especially if you don't have the additional software to keep you secure. I was a stupid college kid, and I just hope nobody makes the same mistakes I did. I moved to a different home and changed all of my information, but I still get nightmares to this day. This happened a few days after my original story about the deep web. I was extremely rattled by what had happened. The police tried to track down the website, but since there was no way for them to recover my history, and I had originally found the sick site by just clicking on random links, it seems pretty hopeless to find it. The police told me to change all my information about myself and to move in with a friend. After changing pretty much all of my information, I decided to move in with my friend, David. David was an extremely honest, hard-working person. He never went to parties, slacked off, got drunk/high. He was very dedicated to finishing college. In fact, he was one of the few kids I knew at the time who wasn't getting on the deep web regularly. I told him all about my experience on the deep web, and that's mostly why he agreed to let me stay with him. One night, we were both up studying very late when my phone went off. I looked to see who had texted me and saw that the person sending the message had no number, just like the last time. It read, "Check your computer." There was nothing else to it, just a simple instruction. I opened my laptop, and when I did, I noticed that I didn't have control of the mouse. I tried to move it, but the mouse had just moved on its own. Someone had remote access to my computer somehow. I never gave anyone remote access before. I tried a whole bunch of keyboard commands, but not a single one worked. I noticed that whoever had control of my laptop was downloading a software, most likely malware, but there was nothing I could do. I heard my phone go off again, and this time, the message said, "Look out your window." I was sitting right by a window. I didn't know which window the guy was referring to, so I looked out the one I was sitting by and saw a man in the parking lot, leaning up against a white van. He had a phone in his hand, and when I looked at him, he nodded. My phone went off again. Type in and hold Shift-Alt-F5 at the same time to activate the software. I called in David to my room to show him what was going on. He seemed just as nervous as I, but with the man just outside our window, we didn't want to anger him. Dave called the police right away and told me that they would be there soon. I didn't activate the software and just sat there. Eventually, I got another text. "I'm coming in if you don't do it right now." I didn't know why he or the person in control of my computer couldn't do it, but I didn't dare to ask. At the same time though, I was 99% sure this program had malware or spyware or something that would be very harmful to my computer. So, I refused to activate it. David grabbed a baseball bat, just in case the man outside tried to come in. About 5 minutes later, we heard the doorknob turning. It was locked, but we then heard banging at the door. We both freaked out and I looked out the window again. Sure enough, the man and the van were gone. The banging on the door got more and more violent until eventually we heard a horrible scratching sound. It lasted a few more minutes, and then we heard footsteps walk down the hall and eventually fade away. I received another text. "We will be back." That really got to me. When the cops arrived, they told me to look at my door. I followed them back out into the hallway and saw, engraved in our door, my name. The police began investigating the whole building, and they had a tech police officer come in and look at my computer. He began to do scans and investigate the weird software on my laptop. Eventually, he managed to close and remove it, and told me that my laptop isn't safe. He said the core files have been hacked into / corrupted. We did a complete wipe of my laptop, and he looked at my phone as well. Just like last time, he couldn't tell where the messages came from, and told me that they would be sure to keep some cops nearby in case this happens again. The next day, I had just got home from school and was really tired. David wasn't home yet, so I went into my room and fell into the bed. I had just begun to close my eyes when I heard a rattling sound in my closet. I lifted my head up and didn't hear it again, so I went back to sleep. After a few minutes, the closet door swung open. I leaped out of bed and saw a man with a mask walking over to me. I ran for the door and slammed it behind me. I ran out into the parking lot, started my car and drove away as fast as I could. By the time the police arrived, the man, of course, was gone. The apartment, surprisingly, hadn't been wrecked or anything. We didn't even find anything stolen. He didn't seem to do anything at first. This night, 2 police officers were monitoring everyone who came in / out of the building in order to catch the man. I opened my laptop and noticed that my wallpaper had changed. It was just a bunch of trees, but it had been changed to a sickening photo of a man with a mask. The same mask that I saw on the man who was in my closet, digging a knife into a baby's eyes in what looked like a small cabin. I also noticed that all my applications and programs were gone, and I saw the same software as last time, right in the middle. I clicked on it, and it had already been installed. Just like last time, it filled the entire screen, and what looked like a live stream was going on. I couldn't exit out, and the live stream was coming from a boy's house. He looked about 13 or 14, and was at his computer. It didn't take long for me to see that I was watching through his webcam, and he had no idea. I saw a small chat box pop up in the bottom right of the screen, and in it, someone typed in the box, "Welcome to our live stream. We are glad everyone could be here. Thank you, John, for being here as well." My eyes got very wide. My name was John, and they were waiting until I was watching to start the live stream. As I watched, I saw that the closet door behind the boy slowly opened, and a man walked out with a toolbox in one hand. He quietly set the toolbox down and pulled out some duct tape. He went behind the kid and put the tape over his mouth and grabbed him tight. The poor kid's face was of total fear. He tried to scream, but he couldn't because of the tape. They were making a decent amount of noise, so it told me that the kid must have been home alone. Major NSFW here, so proceed with caution, please. I tried hard to exit out, but I couldn't. I then saw the man take out a screwdriver and drive it into the kid's chest. Blood began to pour out, and the kid made an awful wheezing type noise. I saw tears come from his eyes as this sick man began to drive the screwdriver deeper and deeper, and then yank it out. The man took out a hammer and smashed the kid's hands several times till they were nothing more than a mangled, bloody mess. I tried every command I could to exit out, but nothing was working. I noticed that in the chat box, several people were cheering the man on and requesting for him to do different things to the boy. The man then took out a handheld electrical saw, pressed it against the boy's face, and turned it on. The boy screamed with pain as the saw went up into his eye, causing blood to go everywhere and get on the camera a little as well. I started to get tears in my eyes as I couldn't stop it. Then, the man took the screwdriver, gouged out the kid's eyes, and took out a large knife. He proceeded to slit the boy's throat and tossed him on the ground. I was sick. I threw up all over the floor, and when I looked back, I saw the chat box. People typing horrible things like "fap fap fap" or "oh my god, that was so wonderful, thanks so much for doing this," etc. In the box, I saw someone named Culture 045 type into the box, "Thanks for watching, John." After that, the program closed on its own, and I was left with a sickening wallpaper. I was sweating, breathing heavy, and feeling sick. Throughout the entire thing, I didn't realize that my phone had gone off several times. I looked at it, and the most hateful, mean messages were coming from my friends and family. I asked my mom what was wrong, and she texts back, "You sent that sick, disturbing livestream to everyone. I can't believe who you are. The police have been called." I felt even more sick than before. Those monsters had sent that livestream to all my friends somehow and made it come from me. They'd pretty much ruined my life within a couple of minutes. When the police arrived, I told them everything that had happened, and quickly they managed to explain to all my friends and family what had happened. They really cracked down on finding these people, and a month later, 4 men had been arrested. One was Culture 045, and the other was Admin 1, and the 2 others were working with them. The site was found and shut down as well, and I got a new laptop and phone. I could say some horror cliche here and say something like I kept getting texts or kept hearing weird things ever since, but none of that happened. They were arrested, and I never heard anything further. It's good to know those men are in jail or perhaps even dead. But what scares me is all the people watching the live stream, who were there for pleasure, are still out there, and that there is probably thousands of Culture 045s out there, all over the world. If you ever go on the deep web, make sure you're as careful as possible. Thoughts of Thai food from the place around the corner cluttered my concentration as lunchtime crept ever closer. No one makes hotel reservations in December. By now, virtually all rooms were booked, and the best rates were a summer memory. Still, there is always a chance for a last-minute booking, so I waited, at the ready, for anything resembling a phone call. two clear tones signalled an incoming call. I glanced at the clock. Of course, just before I clocked out, I thought to myself. Putting on my dressiest phone voice, I responded to the call. Thank you for calling the reservation centre this afternoon. How may I help you? I'm at the front desk of the Towers, and they say our reservation has a problem, the woman explained with a hint of desperation. Forgetting about the proximity of lunch, I leapt into action. I'm terribly sorry about the issue. Please tell me your name and the location you booked to stay at. I'm Sandra Henshaw, and I'm staying at the Bainbridge Towers and Resort, she replied. Unsure of the location, I did a quick search in the computer. Are you sure the location you're staying at is one of our hotels? I can't find it in the system. I dialed the number provided by the desk, her tone sharpening. Where is the hotel located? I query. Montserrat. It's in the Caribbean. I searched again for any hotel in the region in an attempt to justify my pay. The news is not getting any better. At this point, I can only hope she's merciful. We don't have any hotels in the region, Miss Henshaw, because there has obviously been some critical miscommunication. Please allow me to direct you to customer care where we will attempt to find a solution for your evening lodgings. You can't be serious. I booked this... I grasped my headset as a powerful rumbling ricocheted in my eardrums. Whatever had caused that noise disrupted the line, leaving only a low, steady dial tone. I quickly checked my hearing, narrowly donning my gear in time to address the next call. Thank you for calling the reservation centre this afternoon. How may I help you? My voice is a distant canned vaudeville star as I struggle to focus on the customer's reply. This is clearly unacceptable. The man's voice full of intent and authority. He continued in detail. I have stayed at your company's lodgings for nearly 2 decades. This is the only time I have ever arrived only to have the clerk inform me that the reservation was not completed properly. I've flown a great distance and hopped several islands. Would you please just get me to my room? Would you be attempting to check into the Bainbridge Towers and Resort, sir? I asked, fearing the start of an epic computerized mess up. Yes, I am. I saw the commercial for the opening during last year's finale of Friends and decided to book it on a whim. My family was overdue for a summer getaway, he continued, clearly frustrated at having to explain himself. Sir? What time of year did you say it was? I asked, as my brain started to nitpick what he told me. It's July 18th, and instead of relaxing poolside with my kids, we are currently standing in the lobby of a hotel in a foreign country with no place to stay. You need to fix this, he said with a slowly raising voice. Well, according to the computer, I don't care what your computer says. Be creative and think of some... The abrupt end of his voice was followed by another thunderous rolling roar through my headset. My fingers vibrated as I used them to shield my ears, reacting quick enough this time to avoid the same inner ear ringing as last time. On a second hearing, I detected anguished screams from a panicked crowd. It's muffled, but I can hear dozens of voices cry out for assistance. Someone in the distance is providing reassurance, and then silence engulfs the line. Barely able to process, I take the next call on instinct. It's only halfway through the customer's complaint I regain focus at the sound of the phrase Bainbridge Towers and Resort. Miss Geraldine. Miss Geraldine, is there any type of disaster occurring in the lobby? Anything that sounds like hell's bowels exploding in surround sound? I ask, knowing full well how the request for information sounds to a rational person. No? Is this some kind of joke? Believe me, Miss Geraldine, I wish I could say I was kidding. All I know is that I've been receiving calls from several guests at the hotel you are staying. No one's booking is right, and I keep getting disconnected due to something that sounds like an explosion in the background. But if everything is fine, then it must be an This time, I hear the screams a few seconds before the rumbling engulfs the speaker. Shock, terror, and pleas for salvation fill the line as I listen helplessly. My numbness is only interrupted by another voice at the end of the line as a new call starts. Hello? Hello? Is anyone on this line? I'm stuck in my resort due to a booking error. Is there anything that... I interrupt the elderly gentleman on the other end of the line. Get out of Bainbridge Towers, now. You need to seek shelter immediately. Some sort of disaster is about to occur. Where can I go? I have no room anywhere. That's why I'm calling you. Some grand opening you have here. Nothing but dozens of people unable to check in, littering the lobby on whatever phones they can find, he said. No, you don't understand. I need you to flee the hotel at once for your own safety. Something is going to happen to everyone. Tell everyone to leave now, I pleaded. Now see here, I'm 82. Just how far do you think I want to be? Again, the line cuts out in tormented confusion. Again, I can't help anyone. Again, I listen to the death cries to those around the caller. Again, I pick up the phone. Are you in Bainbridge Towers? Not according to the reservation desk, replies a confused, younger gentleman. Get out of there now. Get everyone to flee for their lives before whatever is coming hits the hotel. In desperation, my voice is demanding the attention of the caller, only afterwards to realize this breath in etiquette. I don't care who you think you are, but I booked a suite under the honeymoon package, and I will not tolerate this occasion being marred by your rudeness. I need to... I hang up the phone and set the computer to stop receiving calls. I close my eyes and wonder how long the gentleman stood, livid at my insubordination, before being engulfed by his fiery fate. Maybe his bride was arriving later and she is still okay. Maybe I'm just stressed and need a break. I clock out slightly early for lunch and immediately regret my actions as my boss walks by. I've been meaning to speak with you today. My veins freeze, hoping that no one has been monitoring my last batch of calls. You are the new hire, aren't you? She said. I forgot to warn you about one of our yearly instances, she said apologetically. The 13th of December is always heavy on calls from Bainbridge Towers. Eventually you learn just to place them on hold and tell them someone is on the way to assist them. Wait. Trying to balance relief, fear and annoyance, I asked. So, this was all just a hazing? Did everyone get a good laugh at my expense? You misunderstand, she said. December 13th is always when we get calls from the 18th of July, 1995. That was when our hotel on Montserrat was lost due to an explosion from a volcano, previously believed to be dormant. There is nothing we can do to help them, other than pretend we are directing them to customer service. Not sure I really believed her explanation. I sat, stunned. Oh, and you don't have any friends or family in the place called Nevada, do you? And you aren't planning on being in that area around October 2023 or 2024? Those connections aren't as good, so the details are a bit fuzzier. she said matter-of-factly. Why? What happens then? I asked, allowing my curiosity to take the bait. Work on February 23rd to find out. Or don't. I strongly recommend don't, she said, without looking back as she returned to her office. As I head out for Thai food, I make a mental note to use whatever vacation time I have on February 23rd. We see the same faces passing by every day, my faithful wife and I. Ghosts walking by our windows, their faces gaunt and pale, their speech slurred, almost hauntingly so. They held up signs, although most of which read similar messages: will work for food, feed me, spare change. You had to feel sorry for the beggars and homeless on the streets when you run a respected neighbourhood diner, their faces unwashed. We thought that we could not just feed them for free. Then regular patrons would always demand the same treatment, that it would be unfair and unjust. Yet, at the same time, we couldn't just leave them out there just to rot either. We had to help them. We looked at the picture of our son, who went and never returned from war. And that was how our idea struck. The next day, when the night was going by lazily, we let this one man in. He introduced himself as Kyle. Kyle was one of those people. He had been sleeping in alleyways and the outskirts of town for years after he was laid off and lost his home, unable to make a living for himself with how bad the economy was doing. He ordered a brisket, the diner's speciality. In the kitchen, as she was preparing the man's food, my wife asked if what we were doing was right, if our method was a way to truly guide them. After a long discussion, I assured her that our friend, Kyle, would be thankful for us helping him along his way. Kyle's eyes lit up as we brought the plate out, and he began to chow down quickly. He was a hungry one. We wondered when was the last time he had ever had a good meal. His mouth was almost mechanical in how quickly it took in and chewed and swallowed each bite down. With a small smile, he thanked us for the wonderful meal. We just smiled on, out of courtesy more than anything else. He blacked out, and was later pronounced dead by the police. We covered it up well. After all, it turned out that the homeless man had a fatal disease and could have died any day. A bit of luck on our side there. The second, the third, the fourth. All these wretched souls that were set free of the suffering from homelessness, disease and starvation. Our efforts were put at rest after one certain customer came in. It still haunts us to this day. Not a moment goes by where we think about what we had done that one evening. He told us that his name was Jason, as I held the door open for him. He was a very scruffy man, in ragged and dirty clothing. It was an eyesore just staring at the guy for too long. He needed help, and we were the ones to set him on that path to a better place, a special and celestial kind of home up high. God was calling him, to take him home with wide open arms. I felt it in my bones, in my blood. We gave him a big meal of steak to eat, and like the rest, he did not seem to notice that it had been spiked with poison. Oh, how he loved it. He told us how it reminded him of his mother's cooking when he was a child. We smiled in unison and waited waited for his freedom. And soon, it came, as always, as we watched his eyes close for the very last time. The investigator, per usual, came as soon as possible. Surprisingly still, they had not suspected a single thing, despite the bodies piling up. At least until we turned ourselves in. The man was apparently an amnesiac after a tragedy a few years back. The doctor, looking him over, noticed that the slum was wearing dog tags around his throat. And my heart sank as he read the name. I was confused at first, but then it struck home. It turned out that our poor, dear son never did die in the war after all. It started when I was 6 years old. I was in school. It was in the middle of a reading lesson, and I needed to pee badly. At that age, actually, a fair few kids still wet themselves, and I always got paranoid about embarrassing myself in public like that. I stuck my hand up and told Mrs. Zebby that I needed to use the bathroom. After the usual speech about how I should have gone at break, she gave me the key to the disabled access toilet, as it was the closest one to my classroom. It was the middle of 5th period, and the corridors were empty and seemed cavernous to me. I was a short, scrawny thing back then. I sometimes had trouble opening doors, especially unlocking them, and I fumbled for a good minute or two in trying to get the blasted thing open. Anyway, as I sat on my porcelain throne, there came a knock at the door. "Someone's in here," I called, disgruntled at the disturbance. There came a pause. Then, the knocking resumed. It was faster now, more determined. "Wait a minute!" The knocking slowed, and a voice replied, "Let me in. I need to come inside." The speaker's tone was thin and reedy, an adult I didn't recognize. I may have been 6, but I also had a fairly good understanding of bathroom etiquette. Mainly that you didn't let more than one person into an area only slightly larger than a cupboard. "Go away!" The knocking intensified until it was a frantic drumbeat, just a few feet from me and out of sight. I heard the voice shouting something, growing more and more desperate. "Let me in! Just open the door, please!" I was terrified by that point. The hammering and yelling was so loud, and yet nobody had come to investigate it. Eventually, my teacher came to find me, angry because I had been gone almost half an hour. When I refused to open the door to let her in, she got a spare key from the receptionist and then took me to the headmaster's office and called my parents. I was suspended for the rest of the week. I never told anyone what happened. It was a few weeks before my next encounter with this phenomenon. I had just celebrated my 7th birthday, and my family were having a barbecue in my honor. It was a glorious sunny day, but as soon as we'd set everything up in the allotments behind our house, the coal refused to light. My dad asked me to go and get some fire starters from the shed in the front garden. It was pretty cramped inside, and I wouldn't fit all the way, so I just opened it up, stood on tiptoes to reach the shelf holding my object, then shut the door. As I turned away, a frantic knocking hit the other side of the door. "Open up! I need to come through!" This voice was not the same one I'd heard the month before. It was deeper, more brooding and angry. I said nothing and hurried away. I had no idea what was happening, but it frightened me. As I walked away, there came a final thump, like a fist being slammed against the wood, and I heard his voice again. "You little asshole! I'll rip your teeth out! Let me through!" I ran back to my party and spent the rest of the day glancing over my shoulder. As you might have guessed by now, there were a lot of these voices. I count at least 30 total. Every month or so, I used to get them, pleading to be let through doors. Almost always, it would be immediately after I shut the door behind me, as though these strange entities had been following me. I never told anyone, but to be honest, I kinda just got used to it. It always made me jump, and some of the voices would make me feel uneasy, but I knew that I was safe, so long as I did not open the door. Some of the voices I got used to the extent that I even named them. There was one which always used to appear at my front door at home. We have frosted glass, and I could see a silhouette of an average-sized man wearing a cap of some kind. He never spoke, but occasionally would push envelopes containing blank pieces of paper through the letterbox. I called him the postman. He was one of the more unsettling ones. If I tried to speak to him, he would look up sharply, then begin knocking. I generally left the postman alone. 20 years on, and I've retained as much normality as possible. I have plenty of friends, and I even have an on and off relationship with a girl I met last year. Not bad for a guy who wakes up in the middle of the night and listens intently to noises you can't hear on the other side of the door. Yeah, my buddies think I'm strange and kooky, but they put up with it. They're all great. I'll miss them. You see, things have started to get strange. Well, stranger than usual, I suppose. 3 weeks ago, I awoke, sweating and crying, though I do not know why. My dreams had been, from what I recall, fairly normal, when a huge shadow had abruptly fallen over everything. Literally, the second I opened my eyes, there came the knocking at my bedroom door. Not just normal knocking, though. This was truly frantic. "Who goes there?" I yelled. Please, help us," it replied. I was surprised. It was the sadistic, angry voice that I remember from my father's shed on my 7th birthday, but it seemed genuinely sincere. There was a pained tone to it, too, as though the speaker were grievously wounded. I actually found myself pulling back the sheets to get up, but I hesitated. I had never before been tempted to open the door. I suppose, as a child, I had so rigorously drummed into my head the idea that whatever lay beyond was evil that it was just common sense. To be quite honest, I came very close to letting the thing into my room that morning. I held out in the end. It got worse. Just 2 days later, I was in my local corner shop. I just paid for a bottle of milk and a newspaper when a great force slammed against the shop door. Simultaneously, a voice began screaming, a long, keening squeal of pain. I whirled to face the door, but there were so many flies plastered over the glass that I could only make out the shape of a woman on the other side, slapping her palms against the window. The shopkeeper stared at me, as though I were crazy. In the end, I asked if he had a bathroom I could use, murmured some half-thought-out excuse, and hid there for 10 minutes until the screaming stopped. There were 4 other incidents between then and now, a mixture of screams and tearful begging. The postman stopped by yesterday too. He knocked, politely, before sliding his usual letter through the letterbox. Then another, then another. A total of 10 plain brown envelopes. The postman waited for a few minutes, knocking occasionally, and then he left me alone. Each letter contained a piece of A4 paper, but somebody had taken a black pen to the pages, scribbling and shaded them with such vigour that there were large tears around the centre and the edges were frayed. I shoved them back into their envelope and tried to put it from my mind. Earlier, my bedroom door shook violently. It wasn't a scream or a howl or a roar that I heard, though. It was just crying. Dozens and dozens of voices sobbing quietly. Another blow struck my door. Plaster flaked from the walls and swirled to the carpet. Still, no pleas or bargaining, just sobbing. Crash! I jumped from my chair. Crash! A hairline crack split the door frame of the door in one corner. My phone began to ring, and I heard a sharp rapping at the glass of my window behind the curtains. I tried answering the phone, but it was simply yet more voices crying. Not even sobbing though. More like bawling in terror and anguish. I hung up, but it kept ringing, so I took out the battery. I have shoved most of my furniture against the door and window. It has been 3 hours since the latest attempt at entry began. The battering has not abated, nor has the crying. I'm fairly sure that my door won't hold much longer. As for my mediocre barrier, it could be swept aside in 2 minutes. I find myself faced with a very real possibility of death. So, I am writing this memoir of sorts, just in case something does happen. Crash. What do they want? Crash. Do they even want to hurt me? Crash. They seemed fearless, even malicious before. Crash. What could have driven them to this? Crash. Maybe I should open the door. Crash. Maybe I should let them in. Silence fell. I realised that even the crying had ceased. For a whole minute I sat there, then got up and hurried to my door, eager to escape this claustrophobic situation. Perhaps I'd go outside where I could be far away from any doors, and from the damned knocking. I pulled away my barricade and turned the handle. Locked? Kneeling, I peered through the keyhole. Beyond my bedroom door was not the corridor that I remembered, but another room. Some kind of library or classroom, I think. It seemed unoccupied, but for one kid, sitting and reading with his back to me. I banged on the door. Hey kid, let me out, okay? He glanced over his shoulder. Yeah, over here. Could you open the door, please? I can't. I'm in detention. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone. Go away. He turned from me, confused and exasperated. I began to stand up. A loud bang shattered the silence once more. I realised it sounded like a fist being pounded against my glass. My window. I heard it again, but this was not the frantic knocking of somebody wanting to get inside. This was not even an attempt to break in. Whatever was beyond the curtain and glass knew I was inside. It knew I was frightened. In the most predatory and sadistic way possible, it wanted me to be afraid. I turned back to the door and began hammering on it, frantically. Hey, let me in, okay? I really need you to open the door. I've been lying down for hours now. It's 5:35 a.m. and there's not much I can do. You know what the worst part about my situation is? I'm in the same room with my parents. They keep looking at me, and I can't help but look back and try not to cry or scream. Their eyes are focused on me, and their mouths are wide open. There's a strong scent of blood, and I feel so paralyzed with fear. Here's the thing. The second I make any hint that I'm not asleep anymore, I'm completely screwed. I will die, and there's nobody around to save me. I've been trying to think of a way out, but the only idea I have is to rush for the door and run outside the front door and scream for help, hoping any neighbours hear me. It's risky, but if I stay here, I'll surely die. He's waiting for me to wake up and see his masterpiece. You're probably wondering what's going on. I do get ahead of myself sometimes. About 3 hours ago, I heard screaming from the other side of the house. I got up and went to check on the noise before realizing I had to use the bathroom. Instead of doing the smart thing and investigating, I used the bathroom first. I could have gotten myself killed right then from my stupid actions, but I actually did my business and took a peek outside the bathroom. There was blood on the carpet. I got very worried and ran back to my room, hiding under my sheets like the pussy I was. I tried to convince myself to go back to sleep, that it was just some really vivid dream or something. But I heard my bedroom door open. Like the terrified child I was, I peeked from under my blankets to see what was going on. I could see something dragging my dead parents into the room. It was not human, I can tell you that. It was hairless, with no eyes and no clothing. It walked like a caveman, with its back slouched as it dragged my parents. But this thing was much smarter than any caveman. It was aware of what it was doing. It propped my dad up on the edge of my bed and made him face me. It then sat my mother down in a chair and positioned her towards me as well. It then started rubbing its hands upon the walls, staining them with blood, and then drew a circle with a devil's pentagram in it. This thing had made what it would probably call a masterpiece. To finish it off, it scribbled a message onto the wall that I could not read in the darkness. It then positioned itself under my bed, waiting to strike. The scary thing is, now my eyes have adjusted to the darkness since then, and I can read the message on the wall. I don't want to look at it, because it's terrifying to think about, but I feel I need to see before I'm killed. I peek at the creature's masterpiece. It says, "I know you're awake." The following dialogue was found written on a scrap of paper in the cell of a now missing John Doe. Sometimes things go missing. It happens to everyone. For my family, it was more than just that. At first it didn't seem like much. A few missing articles of clothing, my wife's earrings and some silverware. Then it started to change and things weren't just going missing anymore. Chairs would be moved to the opposite side of the room. Items that didn't belong to us would replace our missing objects. It continued for weeks before stopping abruptly, and for some time, it never occurred again, until the day the dog went missing. We kept him inside and locked the doors at night after we let him out for a few minutes before bed. One day, we woke up and he was just gone. No open or unlocked doors, and his kennel was unopened. We posted missing signs all over the neighborhood, thinking he had just run off. For months, we never gave it much more thought than that. That's around the same time my daughter went missing. No open windows or doors, just like the dog. She was gone without a trace. We kept telling everyone we had no clue what happened to her. No one believed us. I tried to stay strong, but my wife fell apart at the seams. Most days, she didn't even get out of bed. Weeks went by without word of our daughter's whereabouts. I was beginning to fear the worst. We'd been hearing about people going missing in the same manner as our daughter. It was all over the news and in the papers. I drew a conclusion that my daughter was connected with these vanishings. And that's when I started seeing him. It was only ever glimpses through reflections, mostly mirrors, but in glasses and reflective surfaces as well. When I told my wife, she called me crazy. She said that the loss of our daughter was hitting us both hard. She screamed and cried. She began blaming me. One day we fought worse than we ever had before. The house was unkempt, and the last thing I said to my wife before I stormed out of the house was that I wished she was the one who had disappeared. I came home later that day, and no matter how much I looked, my wife was nowhere to be found. Just like the dog, just like my daughter, no open windows, no open doors, not a single trace to be found. Before they locked me up, I continued to catch glimpses of him behind me. So strange that I only ever caught them in reflections. When I would turn to face him, I would find I was alone. I simply thought I was going crazy, until he gave me his name. He didn't speak it. I don't think he talks or makes any noise at all. I awoke one morning in pain and found it scratched into my chest. Such an odd name. Grubby. How can a name like that bring so much fear to my entire being? I showed the investigators my wounds when they took me in, but they just wrote it off as a self-mutilation. It's like he wants to be known, but only as a phantom. I still can't shake the feeling that he's behind me. There are no reflective surfaces in my cell, so I can't confirm it, but I know he's there. I'm writing this in the dark. My cell is locked. There are no windows. And I think he's going to take me. The police found this letter in an empty cell where a father had been held to await questioning on the disappearance of his wife and daughter. There were no signs of a struggle. The cell was locked tight, and there was no possible escape without being let out by security. He was simply gone without a trace. Further investigation is pending on his and his family's disappearance. I'd never been too fond of anyone at my local school. They were a little too rude and boring for me. You see, I grew up in a small area with not many people interested in art like I am, so I had to venture off from home and found myself attending a pretty rural art college. It's sort of like a normal university, except it's full of big-headed people. Now, the only reason why I'm here is because I've always wanted to be an illustrator, a children's book designer of sorts. I'd always taken a keen interest in children's media and classic books, such as the Arthur series. So, when I was sent to live at this college, I was taken back when I realized a lot of the other students here were all fine artists. You know the kind. The ones who like to splatter paint on a canvas and claim it's art. I'm not really big on that sort of thing, but I didn't question it. I settled into the new place pretty quickly. I was sharing a dorm with a few other students. There was myself, a graphic designer named Josh, a film/animator named Lily, and there was one more guy called Daniel. Daniel was one of those fine artists I just described to you. His room was decorated with photographs of distorted women, and he always had weird music playing too. It was sorta like trippy 60s music. He also liked to smoke, so his room always smelled like an old ashtray. It was pretty gross, but he was a nice guy and we all got along well enough. We soon became a tightly packed group of friends. It was the start of a new term for all of us, and we all came back from home after spending the summer there. We all unpacked our things and started talking about what we had done over the summer. "I went hiking with my stepdad. We went on some of those summer camps," replied Josh. "I spent most of my time with my girlfriend. We watched films and went to watch some plays too," Lily said. She spent a lot of time whining about missing her sporty girlfriend, but we were glad they got some time together. I hadn't really done much worth mentioning. I did the usual stuff. I went out to parties and went on trips with my family. Nothing really that special. I was just about to pipe up and speak when I got interrupted. "I spent my time at the dentist," we heard Daniel say. "My father is a doctor of sorts, so he let me come with him sometimes and explore the hospital. My favourite place to visit was the dentistry. I got to touch and feel the teeth. It was cool." We all stared at him a bit confused. Were you even allowed to have strangers go into the hospital rooms, let alone play with the equipment? We didn't really care. We knew Daniel was that sort of guy anyway. He was known for getting into trouble for the sake of his art. That was always his excuse. We all spent our first couple of days getting to grips with our assignments. We all found out what we had to do. Naturally, I had to study some illustrators and just mimic their styles. Josh spent some money on a new Mac to do some more design tests, and Lily had to start playing about with claymation. It was a pretty nice vibe when we'd all be at our dorms talking and giving ideas. Well, at least it was nice, until Daniel would start insulting us. He'd never been the same since he came back from the summer break. He seemed more cold and distant. We assumed something must have happened to him over the break, so we decided not to press him on it. He never told us anything about his projects. In fact, he never even told us what the subject was. It was pretty normal for Daniel to be reserved, but never this much. At nights, he'd just make himself some dinner and then shut himself in his room, crank up the music and not be seen until the next morning. The rest of us would go out places, like go bowling or down to a local gig. Daniel used to happily tag along, but not anymore. One night, myself and Josh had just gone out for a long night. Lily didn't come with us. She said she wanted to see if Daniel was okay since he hadn't been talking to us for a few days now. We could see her point and complied. She had spent the evening knocking on his door and trying to get him to speak with her. Just before moving, we saw his door open and Lily step inside before it was locked again. Brushing it off, we head out. We'd gone to see a movie and then go out for a few innocent drinks. It was fun, but we didn't get home till around 2 a.m. When we got back, Josh just said, "Good night," and went straight to bed. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I was pretty damn hungry. Drinking always made me hungry, so I raided our fridge and found some cold pizza from the night before. I was going to go back to my room when I realized something I didn't notice before. Daniel wasn't in his room, and Lily wasn't in hers. Due to Daniel's strange new behaviour of locking himself in his room until early hours, and Lily never went anywhere without texting us, this was pretty weird. I went over to his door and gave it a knock, and sure enough, the door just opened right up. It wasn't locked or anything. I assumed he and her had gone out with some of his Ponzi art friends, but it wasn't like Daniel to leave his door open like this. I've always been a bit nosy, so I stepped inside to see if there was any signs that he had gone somewhere. His keys were gone, his jacket was gone too, but he left his wallet on his desk. The other thing that was odd was that he'd left his laptop on his bed, and it was still on. The screen was still lit up. Curiosity got the better of me. Perhaps this could be my chance to find out about his art project he'd been hiding. I mean, Daniel was a fine artist, so it could have been anything. I noticed that he had a USB plugged in, and 2 files on the screen. One was called Dentist Photos, and the other file was a singular image named teeth.jpg. I clicked on the Dentist Photos file, and there was just pictures of people's teeth and plastic molds of teeth. It was nothing interesting. I clicked back off the file and decided to check out teeth.jpg. The image would be forever burned into my brain. It startled me so bad that I slammed the laptop shut, shaking as I sat back. I wasn't sure if I wanted to lift the screen again, but I knew I had to or Daniel would know someone touched his laptop. I lifted the screen again, staring at the image for a brief moment before clicking away from it nervously. I then made a decision. I needed to show this to Josh and Lily in the morning. This was seriously messed up. I mean, I knew that Daniel was an artistic kind of guy, but this was just insane. I quickly bolted back to my own room and scoured for my USB drive. I eventually found it and darted back to Daniel's laptop where I copied the image onto my USB. I stared at the image for a little while longer. I was trying to dismiss the image as a mere photo manipulation, but there was just something so wrong about it. Perhaps it was the black, soulless eyes, or the fact that whoever or whatever this creature was pulling up its mouth in such a weird and disturbing way. It almost looked forced, like whoever this creature was forced to pose in this way. I shook it off as a mere thought and fixed up the laptop so it didn't look tampered with before I went back to my own room. Soon enough, I heard our front door open, then the sound of footsteps, then Daniel's door locking. Daniel was back home, but there were no signs of Lily. The next morning, I waited until Daniel had gone out for one of his lectures, and since it was a Friday, Josh and I had the morning off. I decided now would be a good time to show Josh the image. I asked him if he wanted to see what Daniel had been hiding from us, and he confusedly but also eagerly said yes. I brought my laptop into the living room and loaded up my USB and opened the image for both of us to see. Josh's expression fell into shock before he spluttered. What the hell is that thing? I could tell just by his reaction that both of us were thinking the same thing. This couldn't have been an art project image. There is no way that this would pass as a fine art piece, would it? I mean, sure, art can be creepy at times, but I can't imagine his teachers would appreciate such a creepy and disgusting image. I know that Daniel can be a creepy guy, but this isn't right. We've got to show Lily that... We both cut off one another. We paused briefly before looking at one another in confusion. Where was Lily. I realised that she hadn't come back with Daniel last night, and neither of us had seen her that morning. When I explained to Josh what I did last night, he began to worry. Lily was never the kind to just sneak off and not tell anyone. I picked up my phone and began to ring her mobile. For a while, there was silence. Then, just from Lily's room, we heard a faint buzzing sound. Josh got up and walked into Lily's room rather quickly. He'd never been one to go into girls' rooms, and came back out holding Lily's phone in his hand with a worried look on his face. Lily was gone, and we had no way to get a hold of her. But maybe she has just gone to a lecture and forgot her phone, I stuttered. Josh shook his head, chewing on his lip out of nerves. No, Lily doesn't have lectures on a Friday, remember? She'd normally at least say hello to us and take her phone. We know she lives on that thing. She never stops texting her girlfriend. He was right. Lily's life revolved around her phone, so we knew there would be no way she'd leave it. Suddenly, her phone lit up. Someone was calling her. We both looked at the phone, then back at one another, before Josh passed the phone to me. I brought it up to my ear before speaking. Hello? On the other end of the line, I realised it was her girlfriend that was calling. I recognised their husky voice. Ah, Lily, there you are. Thank God you're okay. You didn't text me at all last night or this morning. I thought something was wrong. I cringed a little bit, realising I had to break it to her that I wasn't Lily. As I spoke, I heard her girlfriend begin to get upset. She was breathing quite heavily, and I could hear the sniffling sound someone makes when they cry. I felt so bad for her, but perhaps she could be my chance to find out anything I could about Lily. Where is Lily? She hasn't spoken to me since last night. I thought she was just playing a joke on me, but now I don't know. I looked at Josh with a bit of a confused stare as he began to pace around a little bit. I put the phone on loudspeaker and asked her, "Why do you think Lily was playing a joke on you? Did she say something odd?" "Yes," her girlfriend replied. "She sent me one message at around 1:30 a.m. I looked at Josh, baffled, before I asked again, "What did the message say?" "Help me." I looked at Josh with wide and worried eyes. Lily would never pull a prank like that on anyone, let alone her own girlfriend. She always told us how worried she'd be about her girlfriend getting paranoid, so we knew she wouldn't send a message like that unless she had a reason. I continued to speak with her girlfriend, but I was getting nowhere. So I reassured her that we know where Lily was and she'd be calling her back tonight. Her girlfriend seemed suspicious, but just agreed and put the phone down. Myself and Josh paced back and forth. We had no idea what this could mean. Why would Lily send a message like that? We continued to think for a while and decided, until we knew where Lily was, we were going to skip our lectures. We spent a long time thinking over things and began to write down connections we could make. Afterwards, Josh read out the list to me so I could think them over. First, Lily goes into Daniel's room at around 10 p.m. She's locked in his room. Then, we return home at 2 a.m. During that time, at around 1:30 a.m, we find out that Lily texts the girlfriend with a message saying, "Help me." You discover that neither Lily or Daniel are home yet. Daniel's door is unlocked and his laptop is still left on. You find the image and then leave. You then return to your room and hear Daniel come home but not Lily. Lily is still not back home yet, but Daniel is. What the hell could this all mean? I thought over it for a while and then came to a conclusion. I didn't want to make the connection, but It's the only connection I could salvage. Daniel did something to Lily. We have to confront Daniel tonight if Lily doesn't come home between now and tonight, okay? Josh looked shocked, but he agreed. Daniel would be our only chance to find out what happened to Lily. Later that night, there were still no signs of Lily. We knew that her girlfriend would be calling soon, so we decided to turn the phone off. We didn't want to try and reassure her with false information. We waited until around 6 p.m. before Daniel finally came home. He looked rather startled to see us, both standing there in the living room, and he lightly placed his art folder and satchel down against the sofa. As we both stood up, Josh spoke to him, and I could tell he was trying to keep his composure. "Daniel, we'd like to have a talk. It's about Lily." Daniel's eyes seemed to widen ever so slightly, but nothing I thought was worth thinking over. He tilted his head at us, looking confused as he asked us, "Why? Is something wrong?" I shook my head. I didn't want him to think we were accusing him of anything. We would never get any answers out of him if we straight up accused him like that. Daniel seemed to look a little on edge, looking away from us as he itched his wrist under his baggy grey jumper. He pushed his rather dark black bangs out of his face as he spoke. "Then, what's wrong? Is she okay? I mean, I know she left her phone here last night, so I suppose there wouldn't be any way to get hold of her." We didn't say anything. We weren't too sure on what to say to him. How are we supposed to ask him if he did anything to Lily without him taking offense? I then realized something. It'd taken me a moment to realize it before I spoke. "You just said she left her phone here last night, right? How the hell did you know that?" I could see Josh's eyes light up. He just realized the same thing I did. How on earth did Daniel know she left her phone behind, unless they went somewhere? We already acknowledged the fact that Lily never leaves her phone anywhere, so how on earth did he know she had left it behind? Daniel didn't answer us. He was silent for a while before he pushed past us and walked into his room, slamming the door shut. We walked over to his door, banging on it harshly before he shouted, "Leave me alone! I have coursework to do. I'm sure Lily will show up tonight. Just stop being so paranoid." We just didn't know what to do. Daniel clearly knew way more than he let on, but there was no way we were going to get it out of him. We walked back into the living room and slumped back down. I ran a hand through my hair. What the hell was going on? I then realized that Daniel had left his bags on the sofa. He must have been too flustered to pick them up when he stormed into his room. I peered around to Daniel's door, hearing no sound of him leaving his room yet. I knew soon enough he would be coming out to get his bags. In a moment of madness, I picked up the satchel and emptied its contents onto the coffee table. I could see Josh's eyes widen before he whispered to me frantically, What the hell are you doing? What if he sees you?" I didn't care. I needed to know anything I could about Lily. She was a roommate, but also a best friend. I couldn't just leave this to solve itself. I pushed through the documents and came across what looked like a ticket. I crumpled it up and pushed it in my pocket. Then I found a zip-up document bag. I pushed it into Josh's hands and told him to go hide it. He complied and went and hid it in his room. I then quickly put all the other stuff back into Daniel's bag and rested it upright like it looked before. I then got up and walked into Josh's room. I watched Daniel go back to the living room and pick up his bag. Before he walked back to his room again, Josh grabbed a zip-up file from under his pillow As we both sat down on his bed, we didn't say anything. We just read the front cover of the file. Teeth. It sent chills up my spine. I knew that whatever was inside would have a connection to the image I found on the computer, but what we saw was nothing we expected. It was a series of photographs. The first photo was a picture of what looked like an abandoned room of sorts. The walls were covered in old floral wallpaper, and the floor was just damp wood. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Then, the next photos were just pictures of tools and plastic tools. We then noticed that the tools were linked to dentistry. You know, the needles and drills. It was pretty creepy. But it was the next photos that made us both drain of colour. It was just photos of Lily, smiling. We flipped through every single photo of Lily, and in each one she had a big, toothy smile. Such a sweet smile. One of her most distinct features was a large front tooth. Just the left one. We always found it cute, but now it was no laughing matter. We noticed on the back of the photographs there were labels, and each tooth on each photo was marked. There were notes on the photos that said things like remove or replace. It knocked Josh sick, and I was more terrified now than ever. We knew that we couldn't confront Daniel about these photos. It would get us nowhere. We sat in silence for a long time, staring at the photos with disbelief. I then remembered the ticket I found and stuffed in my pocket. I reached into my pocket with a shaky hand and pulled it out. Bringing to my vision, it read, Group Ticket 2, Location Station Road, Date 28th of the 9th, 2011, Time 11:34 p.m. We both looked at each other with firm gazes. It was just yesterday evening. We knew exactly what we had to do now. We had to find where Lily was. We never saw Daniel for the rest of the evening, and Josh had become incredibly paranoid. He asked if he could sleep in my room tonight, although I thought it was a bit awkward. I didn't mind. I mean, he was scared real bad, so I didn't want to leave him alone like that. When Josh was sleeping, I printed off the disturbing image for referencing. Then, I had spent most of the night planning for the next day. I had already emailed our lecturers, letting them know we weren't going to show up because we felt sick, and I checked how far Station Road was. To my surprise, it was only an hour's drive away. So I figured we could take Josh's car up to Station Road and figure out the location where Daniel and Lily have been from there. The whole time, I kept staring at the teeth.jpg image. A horrible thought crept into my mind. I didn't want to think about it, but it could have been a possibility. Was the person in the picture Lily? Every time I thought about it, I'd shake it off, telling myself I was just paranoid. But it would all add up. The timing, the photographs, it would all make sense. I didn't want to believe it, and I certainly wasn't going to until we found Lily. The next morning, myself and Josh got up around 6 a.m. We wanted to be out of the dorms before Daniel woke up, and we made sure to lock our own doors. We also decided to take Lily's phone with us. We didn't want to leave anything behind that would indicate that we were suspicious. We left the dorm room and got into Josh's car. I had brought a long and small bag of different things, such as the photographs, a flashlight, a camera, and a notepad with a pen. We loaded ourselves into the car and made our way towards Station Road. We were able to pinpoint it with my mobile GPS. When we got there, we found that we were in a rather abandoned looking area of town. The place was practically deserted. All we could see were tall, crumbling buildings and little empty houses. We took out the photo of the room and began to walk up to each little house. We pressed our faces to the glass to see if we could make out the floral wallpaper like the room in the photograph. We spent a good few hours doing this. Nothing. We were getting pretty angry at this point. We just wanted to get Lily back. Josh got so angry that he walked up to one of the house walls, kicking it harshly as he shouted from the top of his lungs, "Daniel, you asshole!" Just as he kicked the wall one last time, we noticed the wall began to tear, like paper. Josh looked down at his foot and realised he had tore what looked like a piece of painted paper away from the stone wall. He then began to rip away the remaining pieces of paper, only to reveal what looked like an outdoor basement. The doors were rusted and scratched, but we noticed that the metallic handle was clean, as if it had been tampered with. Josh looked over his shoulder to me, and I gave him a nod. I quickly took a photo of the layout of the basement-like thing. Josh then walked down to the doors and gave them a push. And to both of our surprises, the doors were simply blocked with a plank of wood, which Josh was able to push away with ease. We then pushed open the doors slowly and cautiously. Who knows what could be kept in here? It was obviously hidden for some reason. If only we knew what was coming. Perhaps it would have saved us both from throwing up. We stepped inside. We were met with a rancid odour. Neither of us knew what the smell was, but we know it made us both feel instantly sick. Josh gagged and coughed, covering his face with his shirt. I swallowed back vomit as I continued to walk. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside the pitch-black stone room. I continued to walk, and we heard nothing. As we walked further into the room, the smell only thickened. It was getting so bad that Josh threw up behind me. He quickly composed himself and stumbled back upright before we continued. As I looked around the room, my eyes met with something on the floor that made my heart race and the flashlight drop from my grasp. It was Lily's knitted sweater. It was the sweater she always wore when we went out for pizza or to go bowling. It was the same grey sweater with the same little torn thread on her sleeves where she would chew on it. I could see Josh from the corner of my eye. His eyes were just as wide as mine as the last of the colour drained from his face. I picked up the sweater, slowly, holding it in front of me when I noticed there was a large and thick bloodstain soaking all the way through the jumper. It started thick from the collar and became thinner as it went down the sweater. I was now the one to throw up. I collapsed onto my knees, puking heavily. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know what to think. I soon maintained myself and stood up again, holding the flashlight as I put the sweater in my bag. Through blurred, teary eyes, I pressed on. I found nothing from where I was standing, and I heard a small light switch flicker on from behind me as a red light filled the corner of the room. And then, I heard him. Josh screamed louder than anything I ever heard before. My stomach was in knots, and I shined my light onto where he was standing. He was standing over a large black table. I watched him just stand there in complete terror, as if he was frozen. I could only imagine what he was looking at, and I truly wished I left it to my imagination. I walked over to his side. There, I laid my eyes on the sight before me. It was Lily. She was strapped down onto the table, wearing nothing but her jeans. Her body was covered in thick layers of tape, keeping her strapped down. One of her arms dangled down to one of her sides, but the other arm was nowhere to be seen. in replacement was just a taped up stub with stains of blood under it. I could hardly breathe. My stomach was now so knotted and my breathing so tight that all I could do was stare. I looked up at Lily's face. Her head had been forced back, and we could see that her innocent blue eyes had been violently gouged out. And in replacement was thick black wax that filled up the empty eye sockets. Her nose had been contorted and broken, snapped in many places. But the worst part of it all was her mouth. Her jaw had been forced open, and we could see her mouth had also been filled with the same black wax. Her teeth had been ripped out and misplaced in all different directions. I then noticed how her mouth had been stretched upright, her cheek tearing to reveal more teeth that had been pulled from her mouth. It gave her a contorted, horrible smile. Her face was covered in streams of her own dried up blood. I stared at the hand that was holding the mouth open. It was her own. Her own hand had been stitched to the ripped cheek. The flesh was torn and falling apart under her nails. Her nails were cracked and chipped, with staples and little threads holding the hand in place. The red fluorescent light created horrific shadows and highlighted every grotesque feature that was now on Lily's face. I silently and numbly pulled out the picture of teeth.jpg and stared at it, then back to the real thing. They were identical. Josh brought a shaky hand over Lily's cheek before he collapsed by the side of the table. I could hear him sobbing horrendously by her side before he passed out beside me. I too felt like I was on the brink of collapsing, but something caught my attention. I could feel the presence of someone else coming into the room, but I already knew who it was, and I knew now there was nothing we could do about it. I heard the door slam shut and the plank of wood being placed over the door. I heard the sound of footsteps. I heard them inch closer and closer until I could feel their presence behind me. I knew he was there, and I knew that there was no way out. I heard their voice speak very faintly behind me. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but it's okay. It's all for the sake of art." But that wasn't what made me collapse. I knew well enough from here that my fate was sealed. After he finished speaking, I heard one more tiny sound that made my heart both ache and my tears only stream further down my numb cheeks. Before my vision faded away from me and my hands slip away from the table, I could hear Lily choking. I was only 12 at the time. I was playing in the scrapyard with some of my best friends. My father was good at all different kinds of things, but flourished on vehicles and motorized machines of any type. He was always hauling in a new broken down truck or an old busted up washing machine, and had no problem with letting my friends and me play in the scrap piles that lay in the backyard. We were out one day just messing about, shooting John's new BB gun, which he had just been given for his 13th birthday. We were all eager for our turn to shoot the beautiful Red Ryder, so we scrounged up some old cans from a bin my dad kept in the basement and started plinking away. A few hours later, it was starting to get dark, so we decided that it was time to wrap it up and meet again tomorrow. Dan, who was the smallest and the most insecure one in the group, was having his turn with the gun and shot one last BB at the can. The BB flew right into the can, ricocheted to the left, and hit the front right window of an old F-150 that my dad had brought in last week. The window shattered. Dan could hardly comprehend what he'd just done. He stood there in shock, just staring at the window. I ran up to him and told him it would be fine, and that I'd take the blame for it. He looked almost to the point of tears, so I gave him a pat on the back and told him to go home. After apologizing about 50 times, he finally left. Bill, John, and Joseph followed soon after. When they were gone, I went to check the extent of the damage done to the window. It was completely broken, shattered all over the seat and floor. I opened the door to see if the BB had somehow made it into the truck. I was scanning the floor, sifting through the glass, when I noticed a small cut in the upholstery of the right seat. I reached into the slit and felt something hard and smooth. I grabbed a hold of it and pulled out what appeared to be a small bottle of bubble juice. The liquid inside of the clear glass bottle had a slight purple tint to it. It was a neat find, whatever it was, so I kept it for tomorrow to show the guys. Tomorrow came, my buddies arrived, and I eagerly ran over to them. Dan came up to me first to ask how much trouble I had gotten in for the truck incident. I promptly told him what had happened, and how my dad said he wasn't going to get much for it anyway. He looked relieved. Anyway, I said, guess what I found while looking through the glass on the floor of the truck? The guys gathered around in excitement. They all said, "What?" in unison, as their eyes widened with curiosity. I pulled out the little bottle of juice and showed it to them. "What is it?" Bill asked. "I'm not sure," I replied. "I found it in a tiny slit in the upholstery of the truck." "I dare you to drink it," John shouted. "Are you serious? No way," I shouted. "Oh, come on," they all insisted. "It must be a shot of alcohol or something. It couldn't possibly be harmful." "Hey, you could get a buzz off it," I thought to myself. After looking at it questioningly, I, being extremely susceptible to peer pressure, decided to open it. It smelled like nothing. I could not make out an aroma at all. There had to be at least some smell, I thought. I passed it around the group and everyone else confirmed that it had no smell. "Must be fine to drink then," said John, and he gave me a thumbs up. I looked into the bottle, closed my eyes, and downed it in one gulp. I woke up on the ground with all my friends around me, looking extremely concerned. "You alright, buddy?" asked John. "Yeah," I replied. "Just a bit dizzy." "How long was I out?" I asked. "Only 20 seconds or so," replied John. They helped me to my feet as I swayed from side to side. I felt very disorientated and lethargic. I didn't want to play anymore, so we went inside to my room. They hung out with me for a while, too scared to tell anyone what had happened for fear of getting in trouble. After a couple of hours, they finally had to leave. I decided to just sleep and see if I felt any better in the morning. That night, I had really strange dreams. I was floating in what appeared to be water in complete darkness. I couldn't feel any part of my body. There was a person floating just far enough away from me that I couldn't make out who he was. He was unnaturally pale, almost completely white. His whole body was extremely skinny, like he had no muscle at all. When I called out to him, he just turned his head slightly and looked to where I was floating. It felt wrong. Something wasn't right the way he stared at me. Then I noticed his eyes, or lack of eyes, I should say. He had large black holes where his eyes should have been. He then smiled. I wouldn't have been able to tell if his mouth hadn't been stretched across his whole face. He looked happy, almost euphoric. He started to inch towards me in the water, smiling that sick smile the whole time. I tried to turn and swim away, but I was too weak to move my limbs. I looked away in fear and tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to curl up into a ball, so I would be smaller and less easy to see, but I couldn't get myself to budge. And then, all at once, there was complete darkness. I looked around me in the vast expanse of nothingness, but there was nothing there. I felt completely alone and empty. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold, dead hand touch my shoulder. I jerked my head around in pure fear. He was right there, staring at me straight in the eyes. I was able to let out a scream, and then everything disappeared. When I awoke, I saw that I had been perspirating a lot in my sleep. I didn't think it was possible to sweat this much in one night. There was literally standing water on my sheets. This was really starting to freak me out, so I ran to the bathroom to wash my face with cold water. I got to the bathroom and started splashing my face. The cold water felt so good on my dry skin. I kept splashing my face over and over for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself stop. It just felt so good. All I could think of for the rest of the day was getting into water, splashing my face again, or getting into any wet environment I could find. I ended up just filling the tub with cold water and sitting in it for hours. It seemed to be the only relief that I could get. Then, the cough started. At first, it was just a small cough that one would use to clear out a mildly congested throat, but soon turned into an awful hacking. I kept coughing until I started to cough up blood. I looked into the bathwater and noticed the dark red drops dissipating into the water. I stood up in shock, ready to cry. I ran outside completely naked, instantly feeling the need to get to water again. I ran to the lake that was located on the edge of our property and threw myself into it. It felt amazing. I was happy. Happier than I could ever remember feeling in my life. I just floated peacefully on my back for a while, until the coughing started up again. I came to the edge and started hacking and spluttering blood onto the ground. There was so much blood. Too much blood. I should be dead already, I thought. I started to feel like I was going to throw up, when something came out of my mouth with one of the coughs. It was pink and fleshy. I took a closer look at it and realized that it was one of my tonsils. I fell back in horror as I began coughing even harder. I proceeded to cough up my other tonsil, everything in my stomach, and then my stomach itself. I was coughing up my insides. But how was I not dead yet? Shouldn't I be dead without my stomach? Maybe I am dead, I thought to myself. I started coughing up more organs, heaving and spluttering fluids and intestines everywhere. My heart was next, then my lungs. I almost laughed as I thought of the trite saying, what was it? Coughing up a lung? You may be wondering why I was laughing. Well, it didn't hurt. I felt nothing but wet, bloody organs sliding up my throat. I was so crazed that it didn't even seem real. After I finally pulled the last of my large intestine out of my gullet, I was empty. Completely empty except for my muscles, skin, brains, and bones. I felt surprisingly calm, and then I blacked out as I slid back into the water. When I awoke, I was on the bottom of the lake. I felt extremely light, and my inside felt empty. But it was empty. I looked out into the murky darkness that I now call home. I could see very little from my spot in the lake, but I was happier than I could imagine. I don't know how long it has been, but I know it's been several years. I haven't seen any other beings like myself down here, but I know they have to exist. How do I know this? Well, you see, I've started to secrete a liquid of my own. It is light purple in colour and much lighter weight than water. I found some old bottles and things on the bottom of the lake to keep a bit of it in. It's a bit lonely down here. I wonder if anyone will find one of my bottles and be foolish enough to drink it, like I did. Some company would be really nice. When Daniel opened his front door that morning, he immediately regretted it. Standing in his porch was his drug dealer, towering over him at 6'9" with shoulders as wide as cliffs, his furious grey eyes beaming down into him. Daniel, remembering the 5 figures he owed him, could only watch as his scarred knuckles homed in right between his eyes. Daniel regained consciousness, still in the dark, only feeling the stinging of a mighty blow now. His woozy head still believed that he was in a dream, and his stomach felt frail and sick. When he realized he was fully awake, he snapped out of his trance, feeling himself lying down and cramped into a box. Oh Jesus, no. I've been buried alive. He panicked and began flailing around, feeling the strong, thick wood that trapped him. He did this for a few seconds until he felt something slide off the top of his belly and heard it fall on the wood close behind him. He felt around and gripped a rubbery, thin cylinder that was wide at the top. He picked it up. A torch. He rubbed his thumb up and down, feeling for the switch, clicking on when he found it. He shone the torch around on his brown slits of wood, confirming that he had been boxed in somewhere alone. He shone it at the top and saw a 3-line message written in black marker directly above him. You got lucky. Next time, there's no escape. Punch here for freedom. Below that, there were 3 arrows in additional black marker pointing to a circle that was a lighter shade of brown to the rest of the wood. It must be the world's softest dealers, Daniel thought to himself, counting his luck. Daniel clutched his hand into a fist, driving it into the circle as fast as he could. It didn't break, but he could tell easily that it was by far the weakest point. He tried again, but still was unsuccessful. One more should do it. Daniel's hand penetrated the top as water gushed down around him, like a tap that was suddenly turned too hard. Daniel choked on the salty seawater that forced its way into his mouth and down his throat as it engulfed his face and body and chilled him to the bone. Daniel desperately punched the top of the box with both hands slowly, the resisting water absorbing his force. Before he knew it, the box was completely full. He banged with his fists and kicked with his legs until his muscles weakened and gave in, and his vision faded to black. Ever since Sarah was a little girl, she was terrified of clowns. Fortunately for her pride, a lot of people harbor that same fear. The idea of a person being goofy and happy all the time, dressed up in a silly costume, made a lot of folks uneasy. so she wasn't alone in that discomfort category. Growing up, she rarely had to encounter one of those over-enthusiastic men or women in face paint and crazy, colourful hair, but when she did, it was bad. So bad, in fact, that she eventually had to go to therapy through much of middle and high school because of nightmares induced by the fear of clowns. As Sarah got older and progressed through therapy sessions, her fear eventually began to dissipate. She wouldn't shut her eyes every time she saw a clown smiling at her from her television screen, or when browsing the internet and accidentally seeing a picture of Pennywise from Stephen King's It. She learned to control her fear so that it wouldn't control her. Her first year of college was perfect because of her newfound ability to stem the cry of the jester-created demons she had within. It would not be for long, however, because she would find that great fear can and would return, and in the most sinister way possible. It was mid-March, and Sarah was as busy as ever, juggling the workload of a typical in-the-trenches college student. It was a Tuesday, and Sarah had just gotten out of the last class of the day, an important psychology lecture by a guest speaker that had lasted for about 2 hours. As she was making her way back to her on-campus apartment, a young man, apparently in a rush, collided with her, causing them both to fall to the ground. Sarah landed on her back, her bag flying off her shoulder. Angry at the man's idiocy, Sarah slowly sat up to ask him how in the world he could be so unaware of his surroundings, but was shocked to find the man was nowhere to be found. Scanning the immediate area, there was no sign of him. Shaking her head, she got to her feet. Picking up her bag, she noticed the flyer face down on the ground. That Neanderthal must have dropped it during his hit and run, she thought. Sarah picked it up and turned it over and gasped. It was promoting a special event called Night of the Clowns. Posted underneath, in the middle of the promo, was a picture of a creepy clown with dark blue hair and a big orange smile plastered on his white face. Below his picture, there was a short description about the event. Are you ready for laughs a minute? Goofballs that could make your grouchy grandma grin? Then look no further, guys and gals, because Night of the Clowns is in town. Prepare for a night of food, fun, and games, hosted by us kooky clowns, and absolutely free. Come along or bring the entire family. All are welcome. Right underneath the description, there were directions and the starting time of the event. Confused, Sarah read that information again. She read that it would be located at the MacArthur Fairgrounds, but she knew that the fairgrounds had been closed for a good 2 months ago due to the country wanting to develop the land for housing and business. There would never be any kind of festival or carnival or anything like that there ever again. Shaking her head, she continued reading it, and it would begin at 8 p.m. that night, and that it would last until early the next morning. Why would anyone want to spend an entire night with some crazy clowns? Sarah couldn't understand. She looked at the clown on the flyer again, his eyes staring back at her. She studied the flyer, trying to remember if by chance she ever heard of an event called Night of the Clowns. Nothing came to mind. It was just too weird. She shook her head and tossed the flyer in the garbage. No thanks, she thought. No clowns for me. At about 7:50 in the evening, Sarah was on the couch in the living room watching television and having some Chinese takeout for dinner. Her roommate, Dawn, was out with her boyfriend, so Sarah knew she'd be there alone for a while. As she sat there, Sarah figured she could give her boyfriend, Jesse, a call to see if he wasn't busy so he could come over. But then she remembered why he wasn't over by now anyway. He would be at work until midnight. Defeated by the realization she'd be home alone for a while, she sighed and ate a forkful of chow mein, flipping through channels. She passed over shows like Dirty Jobs and Criminal Minds, not finding anything she wanted to watch, until she saw that Man of Steel was on HBO. As she began watching the movie, she noticed the picture of her TV begin to become fuzzy. Suddenly, the screen went from showing Superman fighting General Zod in Metropolis to a disturbing face of a sad clown with dark makeup. It was juxtaposed across the entire screen, and it made Sarah jump in her seat. The clown just stared at her and motioned for her to come closer. Sarah fumbled for the remote and shut off the TV. She shook her head. Damn clowns. For the life of her, she didn't know how in the hell it went from Superman to a freaky clown. But she didn't care. Enough TV for tonight. She looked at her phone and saw that it was 8 p.m. She jumped when her cell phone suddenly rang. She looked at the number and didn't recognize who the caller was. Sarah answered the phone. "Hello?" she said. After a few moments of silence, a voice that sounded like Disney's Goofy responded. "We were waiting for you, Sarah. We're starting the fun. We need you here." Sarah tried to pinpoint anything about the silly voice that might seem familiar and laughed. "Okay, who is this? Jesse, cut it out." The person chuckled. No, not Jesse." Sarah, still smiling, shook her head. "Okay, well, whoever this is, I'm going to go now." Before Sarah could hang up, however, the voice laughed hysterically, and suddenly her television came back on. As Sarah watched in horror, that same creepy, sad clown was looking at her, this time standing next to a man in a chair with his hands tied behind his back. The clown held a knife to the man's throat. As Sarah slowly recognized who the man was, she uttered a cry and cupped her mouth with a hand. "I wouldn't just hang up yet, Sarah, or poor little Jessie will have to go away." Sarah looked at her phone, terrified and shaking all over. Who are you? What the hell is this?" Her eyes glued to the television. She could hear the man on the phone let out a throaty guffaw. "I'm just a clown, Sarah. You're not afraid of clowns anymore, right?" Tears began to fall down her cheek as she looked at Jessie's terrified expression. She choked back her tears. No, I'm not. Please, just let him go." The man sighed deeply. "Of course, but you have to come here first. Come to the Night of the Clowns. We're waiting, Sarah. We're waiting." The man hung up and the television went dark. Sarah sat there in shock, her phone still pressed firmly against her ear. She slowly lowered the phone and thought about calling the police. As she dialed 911, she realized that this wasn't a guy messing with her TV or some average Joe kidnapper. This was paranormal, something outside of the realm of logic entirely. She understood what she had to do to save her boyfriend. She had to go to the Night of the Clowns. Sarah drove as fast as she could to the MacArthur Fairgrounds outside of the city. The closer she drove to the area surrounding the fairgrounds, a thick, heavy fog enveloped her car. Before she knew it, she had arrived at the large, closed iron gate of the fairground entrance. She was shocked to see a grand marquee, accompanied by a bubbly, clown-faced greeter from above. Bright strobe lights in different colours lighting up the night sky. She looked past the rusty bars of the iron gate and could see game booths and rides of all kinds. There was loud, carnival music booming into the air, and the distinct sound of children's laughter. What she didn't see, however, were people. Anywhere. It was as if the entire place was run by ghosts. Sarah slowly got out of the car, and almost immediately, the gate began to creak open. She cautiously approached the gate, looking around nervously. Suddenly, a group of clowns appeared before her, laughing and encouraging her to come inside. They wore an assortment of costumes, wearing different kinds of wigs and hats. There were male and female clowns, all flashing her painted, creepy grins. Sarah approached them, sweating with fear. "Okay, I'm here. Where is he?" One of the clowns, wearing a top hat and carrying a funny-looking cane, looked at the rest of the clown posse and giggled. He looked at Sarah and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll take you right to him, my dear. Then we can all have a splendid time." The clown wrapped an arm around her neck playfully, and all the other clowns giggled. Scared to say or do anything, Sarah allowed the clowns to lead her to Jessie. As she passed ride after ride, booth after booth, she noticed that more and more clowns surrounded her. She also noticed that their faces became more disturbing, their forms more monster-like, as they moved deeper into the twisted carnival. She saw clowns that were impossibly tall and slender reach out to her, smiling at her with stained, yellow teeth. She saw a clown hunched over like some type of animal, hissing at her, a tongue like a lizard's flicking in and out between her crimson lips. One clown she passed was wearing a crude, fleshy mask over his face, covered in blood. His red eyes seemed to shine like eerie orbs of light. The group of clowns escorting her finally arrived at a large polka dot tent. The clown in the top hat spun Sarah by the shoulders so she could face him. Sarah trembled as she looked into his evil, manic eyes. "Where is he?" The clown tilted his head, motioning to the large tent. "Right in here, my dear. Go inside and we'll get started." He let go of her shoulder, and Sarah slowly walked into the tent. She was greeted by bright lights and great applause. She held a hand over her eyes, almost blinded by the light. She blinked several times and saw that there were hundreds of clowns sitting in bleachers surrounding her and watching her with glee written all over their painted faces. In front of her, she saw Jessie, still tied up in the chair, with that creepy, sad clown wielding the blade dangerously close to his neck. Sarah cried in anger and ran towards Jessie and the clown. She was mere steps away when the clown pressed the blade harder against Jessie's throat. Jessie looked at her boyfriend and realized he had passed out. She looked at the menacing clown holding him hostage, fury in her eyes. "Let him go!" she screamed. The clown just looked at her with his dark frown, and then at Jessie. He shook his head sadly, and without warning, slit Jessie's throat wide open. Blood sprayed everywhere as Jessie convulsed in the chair, a sickening gurgle coming from his throat as he stared at Sarah with terrified eyes. Sarah, without thinking, ran up to the clown and punched him in the face. The clown fell backwards, the knife flying from his gloved hand. The clown watched as Sarah cradled Jessie in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah felt Jessie go limp in her arms as blood ran down her chest. She heaved as she held his head, crying uncontrollably. He didn't deserve this, and she felt the inevitable wave of guilt come over her. This is all my fault, she thought. A disturbing cackle to her right caused her to snap her head up, and she could see the sad-faced clown was now getting up, smiling at her. Gently laying Jessie's head down, Sarah quickly got up and picked up the knife. Before he could utter a word, she pounced on him, tackling him to the ground. With the mentality of a deranged animal stricken with grief, she stabbed the sad clown in the chest over and over and over. The clown cried out in protest, telling her to stop, but it was to no avail. Sarah stabbed him as hard as she could, laughing as he choked up blood and his eyes rolled back in his head. Even after the clown's eyes closed, his death apparent, Sarah kept stabbing him. After a few minutes, she finally stopped and looked up, her shirt stained with his blood now. She looked at the crowd. They were silent, unmoving, waiting for her next move. Crying, she threw the knife to the ground. "Are you happy now? Look at what you've done to me!" she screamed. The clowns continued to watch her in silence. Finally, the clown with the top hat and funny cane entered the tent. His eyes widened when he saw the sad clown lying in a pool of blood. He looked at Sarah and smiled. Raising his arms in the air, he faced the crowd of clowns. "Wackos and jokers, jesters and loons, she has done it! Our Sarah has done it! Finally conquered her fear of us!" The clown audience erupted into laughter and applause, jumping up and down in their seats. They threw flowers and streamers and sprayed silly string into the air. The clown approached Sarah, his grin getting wider as he got closer. She stared at him with the utmost hate in her eyes. "Just leave me be, please," she cried. The clown shook his head and motioned to the crowd. "Leave? Why, my dear, you are never going to leave." Sarah looked at him, shaking her head in confusion. "But why? What have I done to you?" The clown laughed and wrapped his arm around her shoulders once more, pointing to the crowd. "Nothing, Sarah. You've done nothing to any of us. This isn't some kind of revenge thing. No. It's something far greater. A test." Sarah, tears in her eyes, looked at him. A test?" He nodded. "Yes, a test. You passed with flying colours. We had to see if you were ready to join us." Sarah looked at him, a chill running down her spine, making her legs feel like spaghetti noodles. Join you?" He nodded once more and laughed. "Yes, join us. We seek out those who fear us and help them understand we aren't that bad. Once they finally understand, they become part of our big, crazy family forever." Sarah, horrified, tried to run away, but the clown held her tightly. She screamed, "Please, let me go. I lost my boyfriend. Isn't that enough for you?" The clown shook his head. "He was just part of our test. He wasn't important. What's important is the fact that you passed. Now you're one of us. Here, take a look." The clown pulled out a large red mirror from the back of his striped trousers and handed it to Sarah. She turned it over and saw her reflection. She screamed at the top of her lungs. The skin on her face was a ghostly white, with dark diamonds around her eyes. Both cheeks painted with black circles, and her lips, now a shade of ebony, formed into a wide grin. She tried to rub off the paint, scratching and pulling her skin to get the morbid makeup off her face. She then realized it wasn't makeup at all, but the skin itself. Trembling, she saw another transformation while looking at her reflection. Her eyes changed colour, turning from a medium brown to a mosaic of green and red. She felt a discomfort in her mouth and felt around with the tongue. She opened her mouth, screaming once more. Her teeth had become canine-like, protruding from under her dark lips. Shaking, she almost collapsed in the clown's arms. He giggled and held her. She looked at him. What have you done to me?" she asked weakly. He gave her a remorseful look and motioned to the crowd. "Nothing, dear Sarah. We made you part of the family." The clown audience erupted into fits of laughter once more, and Sarah watched them. She studied their faces for the longest time before looking up at the clown holding her. They were demented, but happy, she thought. Happy. The sound of their laughter soon became soothing, comforting in a strange way, like a relaxing tune you could listen to before you drift off to sleep. Slowly, a smile came to her face and she giggled. And she began laughing hysterically. Nothing else could be heard but the sound of clown's laughter floating up out of the tent and into the cold, dark night.